Welcome back. You're watching Australian Agenda, where Dennis Shanahan, Paul Kelly and I are sticking in for an interview now with Labor's Parliamentary Secretary for Health, Nick Champion, and Liberal Party backbencher, outspoken backbencher from time to time, Craig Laundy. Thanks, both of you gentlemen, for your company. A quick look back. Craig, you've only just arrived in the Parliament, so I might not ask you this, but Nick Champion, no doubt, you would say in a policy sense perhaps, that the Abbott government is in an early sense off to some of the policy problems that Labor had during its time in power, but not in a leadership sense. I mean, as we've chronicled there, it was these differences of opinion between Julia Gillard and Kevin Rudd that was so focused around personality that was a real problem.
Oh, look, I think you can talk about the history of the previous government, and Paul's book traverses it, I suppose, nicely. But look, we're focused on today, and today what we find is a government that's mired in problems largely of its own making. A very regressive budget, a budget that's based on broken promises.
Well, one element of that, let's move into today. One of those in your portfolio area of health, reported in the Sunday News Limited papers, is that they look to be shifting their position on the GP co-payment so far as immunisation and so on goes. They are trying to, in a sense, walk back from a starting point that Labor was quite critical of where they were at.
Well, you can't walk back from the regressive nature of the $7 GP tax, because if you say a worker on 30 hours a week or 40 hours a week and you've got to go to the doctor, you're going to face this every time you go into the waiting room, every time you get a blood test, every time you have a repeat journey to the doctor. So this is a compounding tax, and it's something that's regressive. It will hit poor people, it will hit middle income people far harder. And it doesn't matter what sort of exemptions they make. They can make it like Swiss cheese if they like. It'll still be regressive at the end of the day.
If we look at the macro dimensions of this, is Labor prepared to live with a situation where there's a $20 or $30 billion hole in the budget?
Well, that's a question for the government. I mean, it's their budget strategy.
There's a responsibility there in terms of Labor, isn't there?
Paul, it's their budget strategy, right? And they've got to take ownership over it. And every day in the paper we read how there's a new incarnation. 1 minute there's an emergency, then we have the Trade Minister telling us that there's a sovereign risk, involved in it. And then we hear at the Liberal Party conference in Adelaide just yesterday, I think it was, the Prime Minister telling us, well, everything's going to plan. So, it's the government who's responsible for this budget's, strategy. It's their job to pass it through the Parliament. When we were in government, we passed our budgets through the Parliament.
Craig, but you hold on to a pretty marginal seat for the Coalition. You're a newbie in the Parliament. I mean, are you happy with the budget sales job so far?
Look, go back to the original point. Yes, I wasn't there for the last 6 years, and congratulations on the book in advance. But look, it was that 6 years that did a couple of things, inspired me to turn my back on my career and get involved for a little while. And yes, in a marginal seat, but hey, I've lived there my entire life. The second thing that we're doing today, and the point Nick obviously wants to gloss over, because I wouldn't be proud of it either, is that we're dealing with the legacy we were left. And Paul made mention of the holes. There are holes, more holes than Swiss cheese in what we're going. The scale of the problem is real. I have never deviated in my language, and as a marginal seat holder, my job is to get out on the front lines and sell it and explain.
Others have deviated in their language, though, and that's Nick's point.
That's not up for me to comment.
But on your side of the Parliament, I mean.
I haven't. We are in strife, and I keep saying it. We're at a crossroads. And the thing, if you go back, and the PBO released a report on Friday, if you go back to Peter Costello's intergenerational report of 03-04, and you look at where we are today, he thought we'd get to where we are today in about 2019-20. We've got there 5 or 6 years earlier. And there is a fundamental change in the demographics of our population that confronted the last government and is now confronting us.
Nick, just on this particular point, you say it's up to the government to make the decision. Fair enough. It's their budget. Accept that. But in principle, do you accept that there is an unsustainability about Medicare into the future? Do you accept that at some stage savings have to be made, price incentives have to be introduced?
No, I don't. I don't accept that Medicare is unsustainable, and it's in exactly the same position as it was basically when we first introduced it. The only difference has been, and is, you know, this is what Liberal Party never want to talk about. They sort of talk about the Costello budget and they talk about now. They never talk about the global financial crisis, which fundamentally changed not just the revenues that were coming in, but the way that growth.
But doesn't that go to Dennis's question that when it fundamentally changed it also fundamentally changed the sustainability potentially of something like Medicare?
Well, not really, because Medicare is in exact the same. If you look at tax to its growth, you know, the revenues to its growth, it's basically in the same position. What's happened is the global financial crisis has come along, knocked, you know, budget finances around the world. You know, nobody's in any different situation. The Liberal Party knew all this before they got into government. They decided to, you know, tell people a bit of wishful thinking before the election and then break all of their commitments after it.
So is Labor's view that we'll just grow our way out of it, but it'll take longer because growth's not what it used to be?
I mean, obviously we'll be presenting a budget, you know, a set of costings as we go into the next election. But in the meantime, it's the government's job and it's their job to deal with the Senate, and they've decided to deal with the Senate crossbenchers. There's been no attempt at bipartisanship in this country from the government, and Tony Abbott's the sort of Prime Minister, he just cannot resist dividing the country. He has to always use very, very partisan rhetoric all the time, and that doesn't help us and the challenges that we face as a country.
But just on this point about health costs, are you saying that Labor doesn't think there is a serious policy challenge to be addressed in terms of future health costs?
Well, obviously there'll be cost pressures on the health system, and we face that. And one of the things that we did is, for instance, we did a number of reforms to the PBS that helped manage those cost pressures. But what you don't do is put a tax essentially on primary health care, because GPs are the heart and soul of primary health care. If you stop people going to the GP, you're going to end up with more hospital admissions down the track, and that is a more costly way. You know, you end up just pushing all your costs back to hospitals where it's
Laundy,
you know, the acute sector is far more expensive than GPs.
What's your response to that? Because, I mean, in your electorate, you must be getting some complaints about the concerns from lower-income individuals about a copay.
Yeah, look, plenty of representations and stopped in the street, absolutely. My response is the safety nets. Yes, you look at the negotiations we have to do, and they are ongoing, so that's point one. Point two, you look at the safety nets there, so children under 16, and I noticed in the story today, it's talking immunisation. Once again, that's commentary. I don't know any specifics. But children under 16, safety net kicks in at 10 visits. Concession card holders, the same. It's a matter of, and you look at, is the thing broken? I get in the street, oh, but that's what the Medicare levy's for. The reality is the Medicare levy this year will raise $10 billion. Medicare will cost $21 billion. So if you look at personal income tax, we're going to raise $164 billion this year. And I say to people in the street, they say just increase the Medicare levy. That's their response. And I say, OK, well, if we did that across the board, we'd need to increase it by 6.25% just this year. It's on its way to $30 billion over the next 10 years.
But that's always been the case, hasn't it?
Yep,
that's always right from 1983 onwards. The Medicare levy did not cover all the costs of Medicare, and it was always funded a certain amount of general revenue.
And I'm suggesting that's why you probably brought a co-payment in. Is that why you brought a co-payment in? It was probably a problem in 1991,
the one that lasted for 3 months was never actually introduced.
But it was a problem then. That's
it wasn't a problem then. And what we've 1991, and we've gone right the way through to now without a co-payment.
Exactly.
Except for co-payment on the pharmaceutical benefits scheme, which was also deemed. Now I know I take your point that, you know, primary health care, GP visits are pretty basic. That's where most people confront their first visit to the doctor. That's fair enough, and it's part of the universality of Medicare that there should be universal care. But the question is, and the same principle applied to the pharmaceutical benefit scheme, that is, you can't get much more primary than going along to the chemist to get the medicine you need, and yet there was a co-payment introduced by Labor. Because it was unsustainable, it also sent a price signal that people were overusing the system. Now, do you feel that there is any overuse of visits to Medicare visits?
Well, even if there is some overuse, and we don't have any figures on that, it's all anecdotal, and I think Peter wrote a very good article about the selective use of anecdotal evidence. But the one thing we don't want is for people not to go to the doctor when they're sick. And I can tell you there's a surgery in Salisbury North, Dr Bruce Groves, just outside my electorate where I used to go to the doctor. They saw a 20% plunge in their patients going to the doctor, just in the announcement of the $7 copayment. Now, that's not...
Is that an anecdotal?
Well, no, that's not overuse. That's people feeling it in the hip pocket and putting it off. And if they put it off, if you put off, you know, if you've got diabetes and you put off going to the doctor because, you know, you've got a very low income, that's going to result in a hospital admission later down the track. No doubt about it, it'll end up costing the government more money, not less.
We've been talking about healthcare in particular, but when we come back from the break, we're going to look more broadly at the budget, as well as the return of Parliament next week after the winter recess. Back in a moment.
Australia, you need a break.
And with these great low fares from Jetstar, now's the perfect time to take one. Take off from Sydney to Launceston from $79, or Adelaide to Brisbane from just $139. Brisbane to Darwin from $169, or Melbourne Tullamarine to Cairns from $199. Fares are one way, checked baggage not included, but may be added for an additional fee. Not available on all flights or days, conditions apply.
For details and to book, visit jetstar.com.
This Father's Day, buy a pair of R.M. Williams elastic-sided boots and you'll receive a free Australian saltwater crocodile belt. Treat Dad this Father's Day with a gift as unique as he is from R.M. Williams, the Bush Outfitter.
Quick lunch on payday, it's the perfect combo. Like a golden schnitzel on handmade Turkish bread with creamy aioli. Hungry Jack's cheese and bacon schnitzel on Turkish. The burgers are better at Hungry Jack's.
With the Coles No Annual Fee MasterCard, you pay zero annual fee and pay 0% interest on balance transfers for 6 months if you apply and are approved for a new Coles MasterCard.
Zero interest for 6 months.
Plus, you can get the Coles mobile wallet that costs zero.
Oh, yeah.
Apply for a Coles No Annual Fee MasterCard today at coles.com.au/credit cards.
Coles MasterCard.
It's Mum's recipe. A steaming, bubbling history lesson in home cooking. It's overloaded and it's lopsided. This pie is made with love. This pie is made with Western Star.
You don't need to be a big business to get the best possible travel rates for your business. You just need to bring an expert on board. A business travel expert dedicated to saving you time and money. At Corporate Traveller, we offer 24/7 service, real savings, flexible payment options and clear reporting. And there's not even a contract to sign. Some business decisions just make good sense, don't they? Corporate Traveller. It makes sense to bring an expert on board.
Sky News Property is your new online resource for investment news, advice and opinion. The vital stats suburb by suburb. The best in the business help you make the right move. property.skynews.com.au.
Welcome back. You're watching Australian Agenda, where we are speaking to Labor's Nick Champion and the Liberal Party's Craig Laundy. Craig Laundy, let me start with you. We might get to the budget in a moment, but national security, the debate is pretty hot. You have one of the most multicultural electorates in the country, a large proportion of people with a Muslim faith within your electorate. You were a critic of the government over 18C. Ultimately, they backed away on that. What's your view on where the national security debate is heading?
Look, there's no more fundamental role of any federal government than to the safety of its citizens. So my job, I'm on the front lines, you're right, of where this is resonating at the moment, where the debate is being held, and my job is to sell the company line, that we need to beef up the laws. Everyone in my electorate...
Are you happy with the company line? I mean, is the company line working for you and your electorate, or are you concerned that it's dividing your electorate?
Look, it is my job to explain what I'm saying to everyone in my electorate, irrespective of race or religion. And when there is a segment of my electorate saying that they are feeling like the laws are targeted at them, and what I'm saying to those people, the same as I would say to everyone, is the laws apply to you and me exactly the same. And that is not discriminatory by definition. What we are concerned with as a government, obviously, is what we're seeing overseas and making sure that that does not come back to our doorstep. How that's being received in the community, a work in progress. But that doesn't stop me from doing my job. And as much as many right-wing commentators out there want to critique me for turning up at the Lakemba Mosque and explaining to 400 people what we're doing and why we're doing it, I'll cop that criticism at all times, because the job of an MP is to consult and talk to all people, whether they vote for them or not, as their elected representative.
Craig, you say it's a work in progress on the security laws. As a work in progress, it didn't actually get off to a good start, did it? The 18C presentation on the racial discrimination laws was a bad beginning. It angered a lot of people in certain communities, and then some of the Prime Minister's presentation initially on the security laws also seemed to target Muslims. The language, it's a question of not the substance of the changes that have been made, but the way the government has presented it. Now, you say you're out there trying to sell it. Is your job being made harder by the sales job on the security laws?
Dennis, obviously two parts to the question, 18C, then security laws. The answer is no on both fronts. And the reason why I say no on both fronts, the problem I have with where the discussion on 18C post us deciding to shelve it has been all around one particular subset of my community. 67% of the homes in my electorate, as of the 2011 census, speak a language other than English. It was not the Islamic community representing on 18C to me. It was Chinese, Korean, Italian, Greek, the wonderful League of Nations that calls my electorate home. So that's part one. Part two, when the PM made his announcement on the shelving of 18C, if you look at the language of it, he talked about, and what many people want to laugh about this, he spoke about Team Australia. Let's talk about that for a minute in my electorate. We're talking about the Islamic faith. Australians of Islamic faith are 2% of the population. Team Australia is 100%. I'm also worried, as a leader in my electorate, of where the discussion has gone to post. I'm worried about the social cohesion of my electorate. I'm worried about the role the 98% are playing, or a small subsection.
Can I ask you about
the
that,
98%?
Craig? You say you're worried about social cohesion. Do you have confidence in the Attorney-General to prosecute this debate? I mean, he came up with 18C, he used the rhetoric that concerned bigots, he ultimately had to be sidelined by the Prime Minister on it, and then he had problems with the metadata debate. Are you confident in George Brandis on this?
I have absolute confidence in the Attorney-General, but at the end of the day, the buck stops with me on the front line. My job is to continue a dialogue with everyone in my electorate, irrespective of race and religion. And I'm worried about that 98%, as I say, the rest of
Why are you worried about the 98%?
Where the commentary's gone to, OK? You've got a series of commentators in this country that are whipping up hysteria, and it feeds in...
Who?
Everyone knows who they are.
Who are they?
No, look, right-wing commentators, OK? And you're talking
about Andrew.
Peter, you can put names to it. It's a series of people, OK? And you have got discussions happening on Talkback Radio. I've received some of the most vile emails you've ever seen. None from my electorate, by the way. And that 2% that I'm talking to day by day that are feeling marginalised at the start, and it's my job to consult and interact with, I'm worried about the overall social cohesion.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Is 18C still Liberal Party policy, and how do you feel about Corey Bernardi in the Senate?
Look, what Corey does is obviously a matter for Corey. The official policy position of us, the PM, has stipulated it very clearly. It's on a shelf, it's gone.
But when you say it's on a shelf, does that mean you just can't get it passed through the Parliament because the political heat's too hard, and next election it will come back? Post-next election? Where's the PM how long is it on the shelf for?
No, the PM has made a decision in terms of national unity.
So it's off the shelf?
It's gone.
It's gone?
Yeah.
Just on the budget sales job, we've talked about the security sales job. To what extent, what are the issues that your electorate is raising with you, and to what extent Are they raising the $7 co-payment and the unfair nature of the budget as it's been portrayed?
That's what's being raised. It's the equity side of the debate. I'm glad. The thing about a controversial budget, if you like, and Nick made mention right off the get-go of the time it will take to get some things through. If you look at the previous government, you look at private health, insurance, took 1,038 days to get through the changes there. If you look at the mining tax, took 1,100 days. So, and if you look at the timeframes attached to things in this budget, we've given ourselves plenty of time, knowing that we will need to negotiate at some stage.
Are you prepared to continue to fight on the budget?
Yes.
You are.
Because I believe it's the right... And the thing about it...
And the $7 co-payment?
The budget as a whole, it's the right thing. It's easy in life to tell people what they want to hear. It would be easier not to sell this, to not to have to do it.
Would it be easier to sell it, though, if there was greater equity, as your constituents are asking, in areas
Peter,
like superannuation changes, eligibility of the pension, these sort of things?
Paid parental leave?
Peter, there is equity. There is equity. What we're focusing on is the cost side of the budget. There's a revenue side of the budget. That's where the equity is housed. A progressive taxation system. We're now at 49 cents in the dollar. So what, we go beyond that? We become the major shareholder in every individual's life in Australia? No. There is equity there on the revenue side of the budget. We are talking, and there's also safety nets, and my job as a marginal seat member, you know, I spoke to a journalist a couple of days ago and explained the safety nets on New Start for under 30s, and she said, well, I didn't know about those. That's my fault.
Well, let's take up Nick's point. Nick's doing a very good job in terms of asking questions. In terms of PPL, what's your view on PPL? I mean, do you accept the reality that there's got to be very, very major change here?
No. I agree with PPL. And I'll tell you why.
You agree with the scheme the way it exists at the moment?
Absolutely.
So if the government changes it, you'll be critical of that?
I believe in the scheme. If they change it and negotiate and explain to me why, it's something we'll consider at the time. But if you look at how the scheme's aimed, 98%, and my opponent will jump in here and say equity, millionaires, the whole lot. 98% of the women in Australia earn less than $100,000 a year. This is aimed at 98% of Australia. We have decreasing fertility rates, and what sits at the core of our structural budget deficit is our population demographics. We're not replacing ourselves. We're growing through ageing, not through birth.
I've got to jump in because we are right out of time, but one final question to you, Nick Champion. Labor is railing against the paid parental leave scheme. Does that mean if a member of your parliamentary staff gets pregnant and therefore has access to the public service scheme, you'll be outraged because that's a waste of taxpayers' money, because it's the same as what Tony Abbott is trying to roll out for the private sector?
Well, no, because there's a range of workplace agreements. Westpac Bank's got them, Coles, Woolies have got them. They sit on top of what the government provides as a minimum. And what we're really saying here is, if you've got this austerity budget and you're slugging into people, you know, the poorest really in our community, why you then... and it's incongruous to expand this, have a massive spending proposal which taxes business and then gives money to very high-income people. It's just, it does not make philosophical sense. That's one of the problems with the government's budget.
Has to end as a rhetorical question. We are right out of time. Gentlemen, Nick Champion, Craig Laundy, really appreciate your time on Australian Agenda. And Dennis Shanahan and Paul Kelly, both of you gentlemen, thanks for your time as well. Thanks for watching this episode. We'll be back at the same time.